The Kethmoran Empire had perfected conquest through theology. While other civilizations bothered with fleets and orbital bombardments, the Kethmorans simply deployed their living gods, bioengineered monstrosities wrapped in enough divine authority to make entire planets kneel. It was efficient, cost-effective, and had the added benefit of making conquered species grateful for their subjugation. High Commander Zefkar regarded the holographic display of Sol 3 with the weary expression of someone who had watched 1,000 worlds surrender. The blue-green marble spinning lazily before him looked unremarkable, save for one curious detail in the intelligence reports. "Tell me again about their religious texts," Zefkar said, his 4 eyes narrowing to slits. Subcommander Nixtel consulted her datapad, tentacles curling with barely contained amusement. "According to our cultural analysis probes, the dominant mythologies feature gods who, well, they lose. Regularly. Sometimes they die. Sometimes the mortals kill them." "The mortals kill them?" "Yes, Commander. Our gods." "They're gods, sir. But yes." Zefkar leaned back in his command throne, a structure that had witnessed the surrender of 73 different species. Each conquest began the same way. Deploy a living god, watch the locals prostrate themselves in terror, accept their immediate and total capitulation. The formula was so reliable that the Empire had automated most of the paperwork. And they worship these defeated deities? "The reports are inconsistent," Nixtel admitted, her voice carrying the tone of someone trying to explain quantum mechanics to a particularly dense asteroid. "Some texts suggest worship, others seem more like cautionary tales. There's extensive documentation of mortals tricking gods, outsmarting them, even putting them on trial." The bridge fell silent except for the soft hum of recycled air and the distant throb of engines that had carried divine wrath across half the galaxy. Finally, Tactical Analyst Morden spoke from his station, his voice pitched with the particular strain that came from processing impossible data. "Commander, there's something else. Cross-referencing their entertainment archives reveals recurring themes of mortals, improving upon divine designs. Stories where they build better versions of gods. Fiction where they replace divine authority with committees." "Committees," Zefkar repeated, the word hanging in the air like a particularly offensive smell. Before we continue the story, if you're new here, make sure to subscribe to HFY Havoc, hit the bell, and like this video. Because if you want more epic HFY sci-fi stories like this one, you don't want to miss out. Management structures, sir. Bureaucratic oversight, performance reviews. Nixtel's tentacles writhed in what her species considered suppressed laughter. One story features mortals who fire their gods for failing to meet quarterly targets. The High Commander stood, his ceremonial armor clanking with the weight of divine authority borrowed from creatures that existed solely to project it. He had witnessed the deployment of Vexthol 17 times across 17 different worlds. Each deployment followed the same pattern. The living god would materialize in all his terrifying glory, mortals would soil themselves appropriately, and planetary governments would surrender before the afternoon meal. "Perhaps," Zefkar said slowly, "these humans require a more personal touch." He activated the communication array, and the bridge filled with the presence that had broken the will of countless civilizations. Vexthul's voice resonated from speakers that had been specifically designed to handle divine vocal cords without melting. "You summon me, mortal commander?" The words carried the weight of mountain ranges and the casual authority of someone who had never encountered genuine opposition. Vexthul's physical form existed somewhere between dimensions, but his presence could flatten the hubris out of entire star systems. "We have identified a new target," Zefkar said, gesturing toward the holographic Earth. The third planet of the Sol system. Pre-warp civilization. Approximately 8 billion inhabitants. Standard conquest protocol should apply. Should. Vexthul's voice carried the faintest note of interest. Living gods experienced something approaching boredom between deployments, and a new world meant new opportunities for creative intimidation. There is one unusual factor, Nixtel interjected, then immediately regretted speaking when she felt the weight of divine attention settle on her like a lead blanket. Their cultural mythology suggests an unusual relationship with divine authority. Explain? Mordun cleared his throat, a sound that echoed strangely in Vexthul's presence. They appear to have opinions about gods, critical ones. They worship inadequate deities. They worship deities they've defeated, Zefkar said. Their religious texts read like military after-action reports written by the victorious mortals. The silence stretched long enough for several junior officers to question their career choices. When Vexthul finally responded, his voice carried a note that the bridge crew had never heard before. Curiosity. They claim victory over divine beings. According to their own records, yes. Impossible. That was our assessment as well, Zefkar agreed. We assume these are fictional accounts, mythological exaggerations designed to inspire their population. Nevertheless, it suggests they may require a more thorough demonstration of proper divine authority. Vexthul's presence intensified, and the bridge lighting dimmed automatically to accommodate the shift in local reality. When he spoke again, his voice carried the anticipation of a predator who had found interesting prey. I will show these mortals the difference between their imaginary victories and genuine, divine power. Their mythologies will be rewritten in languages of submission and terror. Standard deployment, then? Enhanced deployment. I want their entire population to witness my arrival. When I am finished, they will understand why no mortal has ever achieved victory over a true god. The connection terminated, leaving the bridge crew in the familiar aftermath of divine presence. Slightly nauseous, vaguely inspired, and completely confident in the upcoming conquest. Zefkar settled back into his throne, already composing the preliminary victory report. In 3 standard cycles, Sol 3 would join the Empire's collection of appropriately humbled worlds. Their strange mythologies would become historical curiosities, their claims of divine victory filed away with other primitive delusions. Begin standard post-conquest administrative preparations, he ordered. New colonial designation, resource surveys, population management protocols. Sir, Mordun said hesitantly, should we prepare alternative strategies in case their resistance proves more organized than anticipated? The High Commander's laugh echoed across the bridge, a sound that had preceded the submission of dozens of star systems. Sub-analyst, we are deploying a living god against a species that worships defeated deities. The only preparation needed is for processing their surrender. As the command ship adjusted course toward Sol system, none of the bridge crew considered the possibility that the humans might not understand they were supposed to lose. After all, every other species in the galaxy had grasped this fundamental concept immediately. Vexthul materialized above Manhattan with the kind of dramatic flair that had reduced proud warrior cultures to whimpering supplicants. Thunder rolled across clear skies, the air itself bent around his presence, and reality took on the subtle wrongness that preceded the collapse of civilizations. He waited for the screaming to begin. Instead, he heard someone say, "Huh, that's new." The living god hovered 300 meters above Times Square, wreathed in energies that could crack continental plates, and watched as humans emerged from buildings not to flee in terror, but to point phones at him. The devices made small clicking sounds that Vexthul found oddly offensive. "Greetings, mortals." His voice shattered windows for 6 blocks and sent car alarms into symphonic hysteria. I am Vex Thul, herald of the eternal dark, breaker of wills, divine architect of your submission. Tremble before— Excuse me, a voice called from street level, amplified by what appeared to be a primitive sound projection device. Sorry to interrupt, but are you here about the Netflix contract? Vex Thul's proclamation died mid-syllable. In 17 previous conquests, no one had ever interrupted his opening monologue. He descended through layers of increasingly confused atmosphere until he floated just above the crowded square, where hundreds of humans stared at him with expressions he had never encountered. Polite interest mixed with mild impatience. The voice belonged to a woman in a dark suit holding a tablet and wearing the expression of someone whose schedule had just become significantly more complicated. I'm Director Patricia Vance, Department of Unusual Foreign Relations. We weren't expecting you until Thursday. You were expecting me? Well, the energy readings have been off the charts all week. Dr. Brennan in the physics department has been practically vibrating with excitement. She consulted her tablet. Though I have to say, your agent's requirements were pretty specific. No iron-based infrastructure within 50 kilometers, ambient temperature maintained between 68 and 72 degrees, and something about dietary restrictions involving virgin sacrifices. Vex Thul found himself in the unprecedented situation of being confused by mortals. I have no agent. Really? Director Vance frowned at her tablet. Because we've got contracts here for media appearances, a book deal, and what looks like a speaking engagement at MIT. Plus, someone from the Vatican wants to schedule a theological debate. A theological debate. Tuesday afternoon, I think. Cardinal Morrison has some questions about the intersection of divine authority and free will. Academic discourse, very civilized. The living God felt something crack in his understanding of reality. I am here to conquer your world. Oh. Director Vance made a note on her tablet. Did you want to do that before or after the Dr. Brennan interview? He's been working on some fascinating theories about extra-dimensional entities and their metabolic requirements. Before Vex Thul could respond, a man in a white lab coat pushed through the crowd with the determined enthusiasm of someone who had found a new specimen. Incredible! The energy signature is completely novel. Tell me, how do you maintain coherence across dimensional barriers? Is it biological or technological? I am divine. Right, yes, but what's the mechanism? Are we talking about quantum field manipulation or some kind of exotic matter interaction? Dr. Brennan, who was indeed vibrating with excitement, pulled out a device that beeped frantically in Vex Thul's presence. The readings suggest you're existing in at least 6 dimensions simultaneously. That's got to be expensive from an energy standpoint. Vex Thul had broken civilizations by simply existing near them. He had never been asked about his operational costs. Your existence is an affront to the natural order, he tried again, though with noticeably less conviction. Oh, we get that a lot, Director Vance said cheerfully. Honestly, after the televangelists, nothing really phases us anymore. Speaking of which, Reverend Jackson would love to have you on his show. Something about exploring the modern relevance of biblical prophecy. I am not biblical. Even better. Fresh perspective. Very marketable. Dr. Brennan circled Vex Thul like a shark who had discovered that fish could do calculus. The bioluminescent patterns are fascinating. Are those functional organs or purely aesthetic? And the gravitational distortion field, is that conscious control or autonomic response? It is the weight of divine authority crushing your feeble reality. Brilliant, but surely there's an upper limit. What happens if you exceed local space-time tolerance? Do you risk cascade collapse or just localized reality breach? The questions kept coming, delivered with the relentless enthusiasm of mortals who had somehow confused divine terror with scientific opportunity. Other humans gathered, not to worship or flee, but to offer opinions about his appearance, suggestions for improvement, and something called branding opportunities. "Your color scheme is very dramatic," observed a woman who had introduced herself as a marketing consultant. "But have you considered earth tones? More approachable? Less existential dread? More mysterious mentor figure?" "I am the herald of your doom." "Right, but doom is such a negative brand association. What about herald of transformation? Same basic concept. Much better focus group results." Vexthal felt something entirely unprecedented, the urge to explain himself. "I have conquered 17 worlds. Each population recognized my divine nature immediately and surrendered without resistance." "That must have been very satisfying," Director Vance said with the tone of someone humoring a job applicant. "But what did you do after the conquering? Did you enjoy the management aspects, the day-to-day administration?" What? Well, you can't conquer indefinitely. Eventually, you need to think about career development. What are your long-term goals?" Dr. Brennan looked up from his readings. "Actually, that raises an interesting point about the sustainability of divine manifestation. What's your energy expenditure during active conquest versus maintenance phases?" The living God found himself answering despite every instinct screaming against it. "The conquest phase requires approximately 70% of my available power reserves, but maintenance of divine authority drops to roughly 15% once submission is established." "So you're basically running at a loss during active operations," the marketing consultant noted. "That's not sustainable. Have you considered diversifying your portfolio? Maybe some consulting work between conquests?" "I do not consult. I dominate." "Same skill set, different application," Director Vance observed. "And the benefits package would probably be better. Healthcare, retirement planning, vacation time." "I am eternal." "Even better. Think of the compound interest." Vexthal looked around the crowd of humans who were treating his divine presence like a career counseling session, and felt something crack in his cosmic certainty. Somewhere in the back of his consciousness, a small voice wondered what healthcare benefits might actually look like for an extra-dimensional entity. 3 weeks later, Vexthal sat in what humans called a coffee shop and wondered how his existence had become so thoroughly derailed. The beverage before him, something called a venti caramel macchiato with oat milk, steamed gently while he tried to process the morning's events. "So the focus group results came back," announced Jennifer from marketing, sliding into the booth across from him, with the casual ease humans displayed around everything, including extra-dimensional entities of unfathomable power. "Good news and bad news. I do not understand why mortals insist on categorizing information this way. Good news. Your approval ratings are through the roof. 87% of respondents found you authentically mysterious and refreshingly honest about your limitations." Vexthal had learned not to ask what limitations humans thought he possessed. The answers were invariably both accurate and deeply unsettling. The bad news? Your brand identity is still a little confused. The younger demographics love the whole cosmic horror aesthetic, but the 35-plus market wants something more relatable. Jennifer consulted her tablet with the efficiency of someone who had successfully branded everything from breakfast cereals to politicians. "We're thinking of positioning you as the accessible God figure for the modern age." "I have obliterated star systems." "Right, but that was then. This is about growth, evolution, finding new ways to connect with your audience." Through the coffee shop window, Vexthal watched humans go about their daily routines, with the same casual disregard for cosmic significance they brought to everything else. A construction worker argued with someone on his phone about dimensional physics. 2 college students debated whether divine manifestation qualified as performance art. An elderly woman fed pigeons while explaining to her companion why traditional mythology was obviously just bad management practices. His communication array chimed with an incoming message from the Kethmoran Empire. Vexthul accepted the connection, reluctantly. Vexthul, High Commander Zefkar's voice carried across dimensional barriers with its usual authority. Status report. How proceeds the conquest of Sol 3? The situation has become complex. Complex how? Are their defensive capabilities more advanced than anticipated? Do they require additional divine intervention? Vexthul glanced at Jennifer, who was making notes about something called synergy opportunities. They have offered me employment. The silence stretched long enough for several nearby humans to glance over with the mild interest they brought to all cosmic communications. They have what? Employment, a job, steady income, benefits package, opportunities for professional development. You are a living god. Yes, but they feel I could be more fulfilled in a consulting role. Something about leveraging my unique skill set in a collaborative environment. Jennifer looked up from her tablet. Is that your boss? Tell him about the dental plan. What is a dental plan? Zefkar demanded, his voice taking on the strained quality of someone whose worldview was undergoing rapid structural collapse. Preventative care for oral health maintenance, Vexthul explained, then paused. I do not have teeth, but they assure me the principle applies to analogous biological systems. Vexthul, you are there to conquer them, not discuss healthcare benefits. About that, Jennifer interjected, raising her voice toward the communication device. Hi there, Jennifer Kowalski, Vex's account manager. Are you his current employer? Because we really need to discuss his working conditions. His what? Well, according to his employment history, he's been working for you for how long? 17 centuries, Vexthul supplied. 17 centuries without vacation time, overtime compensation, or even basic workplace safety protections. That's actually illegal in most jurisdictions. Zefkar's voice climbed several octaves. He is a weapon of divine conquest. Right, but even weapons have maintenance schedules. When was his last performance review? Has he received any professional development training? What about advancement opportunities? The communication array began emitting sounds that Vexthul had never heard before. Something between static and what might have been alien hyperventilation. This is insane, Zefkar finally managed. You are divine beings. You exist to project the Empire's will across the galaxy. But do they enjoy it? Jennifer asked, with the relentless logic of someone who had spent years optimizing human resources. Job satisfaction is crucial for long-term productivity. When did anyone last ask Vex what he wanted out of his career? Vexthul found himself considering the question with disturbing seriousness. When had anyone asked what he wanted? His existence had been defined by the Empire's requirements, his purpose determined by conquest schedules and submission quotas. He began, then stopped. I enjoy the problem-solving aspects of manifestation across dimensional barriers. The technical challenges are stimulating. See, he's got interests beyond just the intimidation work. Jennifer made another note. Have you considered expanding into research and development? Maybe some teaching? Teaching what? Zefkar demanded. Well, Doctor, Brennan's been asking about guest lectures in his advanced physics classes. Something about practical applications of trans-dimensional theory. Vexthul felt a strange warmth that had nothing to do with his internal energy sources. The students ask excellent questions. You've been teaching mortals? Sharing knowledge, Vexthul corrected. They have fascinating theories about the intersection of consciousness and reality, manipulation, very innovative approaches to problems I had never considered. The communication array fell silent again, then crackled back to life with the voice of someone whose universe had just shifted sideways. Vexthul, You will return immediately for reassignment. Actually, Jennifer said, consulting her tablet, he's got a non-compete clause in his new contract. Nothing personal, but we can't have him taking proprietary knowledge back to competitors. Proprietary knowledge? Coffee preferences, local cultural integration techniques, effective communication strategies for post-millennial demographics. Very sensitive stuff. Vexthul sipped his macchiato and found himself enjoying the absurdity of the situation. For the first time in 17 centuries, someone was negotiating on his behalf. Besides, he said, surprising himself with the decisiveness in his voice, I have tenure-track possibilities here. 6 months after what historians would eventually classify as the most politely devastating first contact event in galactic history, Vexthul reviewed his performance metrics while waiting for his morning latte. The quarterly reports made for fascinating reading. 0 conquered worlds, 0 terrified populations, but a 96% approval rating among peer-reviewed physics journals. His resignation letter to the Keth-Moran Empire had been a masterpiece of professional courtesy, complete with 2 weeks' notice and a comprehensive transition document for his replacement. The Empire's response had been less professional, mostly incomprehensible shrieking, followed by what appeared to be a bureaucratic breakdown of galactic proportions. The tenure committee approved your application, announced Professor Chen, settling into the faculty lounge chair beside him. Congratulations, Dr. Vexthul. Doctor still sounded strange, even after defending his dissertation on practical applications of multidimensional energy distribution in post-industrial societies. The humans had insisted on the formal title, explaining that expertise deserved recognition regardless of its origin point. Any word from your former colleagues? Professor Chen asked, nodding toward the communication device that had been suspiciously quiet for the past month. 3 more resignation letters this week, Vexthul reported, scrolling through his messages. Keth-Jules cited irreconcilable differences with management regarding work-life balance. Mextara mentioned something about pursuing opportunities in the non-profit sector. The Keth-Moran Empire was experiencing what their internal memos euphemistically called unprecedented divine resource allocation challenges. In reality, their living gods had discovered that humans offered better working conditions, more interesting problems, and significantly superior coffee. Dr. Vexthul? A student knocked on the office doorframe, tablet in hand and expression bright with the particular enthusiasm of someone about to ask a question that would require rewriting textbooks. I finished running those calculations on your suggestion about inverse reality anchoring. And? Well, if we're right, it means the Empire's entire conquest methodology is basically an elaborate form of performance anxiety. Vexthul considered this assessment while sipping his latte. Explain. They send you to intimidate populations into submission, right? But intimidation only works if the target population believes in the validity of the power structure being imposed. If they don't, if they just see you as an interesting phenomenon to study, then the whole system collapses. Professor Chen leaned forward with interest. So humanity's immunity to divine intimidation isn't accidental? It's cultural, the student continued, warming to her topic. We've been arguing with authority figures for millennia. Gods, kings, physics professors. If something claims to be in charge, our first instinct is to ask for credentials. The observation was both accurate and deeply unsettling. Humanity's resistance to conquest hadn't been military or technological. It had been essentially clerical. They had treated the arrival of an unstoppable cosmic force as they would any other service provider, with polite skepticism and a demand for references. Vexthul's communication array chimed with an incoming message from an unfamiliar source. He accepted the connection and found himself speaking with Sub-Commander Nixtel, whose voice carried the weary tone of someone whose job had become infinitely more complicated. Dr. Vexthal, she began, then paused. That feels strange to say. The title was earned through legitimate academic achievement, he replied with perhaps more defensiveness than necessary. I'm sure it was. Listen, we have a situation. The High Command has decided to adjust our expansion strategies. Meaning? Meaning we're no longer in the conquest business. Apparently it's bad for morale when your weapons of divine terror keep filing for workers' compensation. Through the office window, Vexthal could see students crossing the campus quad, engaged in animated discussions about everything from quantum mechanics to lunch plans. Their casual disregard for cosmic hierarchy had accidentally revolutionized an entire galactic empire's approach to civilization. What will you do instead? Well, Nixtel said, with the careful tone of someone whose career had taken an unexpected turn. We're considering cultural exchange programs, maybe some kind of educational consulting? I could provide references. That would be helpful, actually. There's also been some interest in your dissertation. Something about sustainable energy distribution models? Vexthal felt that strange warmth again. The satisfaction of work that mattered. Problems that challenged him. Colleagues who valued his contributions, rather than simply fearing them. It was, he realized, the first time in centuries that anyone had asked his opinion, rather than demanded his obedience. Send me the details, he said. I might know some people. After the communication ended, Professor Chen shook her head with amusement. You realize what you've accomplished, don't you? You've accidentally turned a galactic empire into a university extension program. The humans accomplished that, Vexthal corrected. I merely provided a case study in the practical applications of treating inexplicable phenomena as research opportunities rather than existential threats. The student looked up from her tablet. So basically, we conquered them with paperwork? You conquered them with curiosity, Vexthal replied. Which, as it turns out, is far more devastating than any weapon they could have deployed against you. Outside, the campus bells chimed the hour, and Vexthal gathered his materials for the afternoon seminar on Advanced Concepts in Reality Manipulation. The irony wasn't lost on him that he was now teaching humans techniques for bending the universe to their will. Techniques they would undoubtedly improve upon, and then politely suggest he implement in his own work. Humanity had never realized they were supposed to be conquered because the concept had never occurred to them. They had simply treated the arrival of an unstoppable cosmic force as they treated everything else, as an opportunity to learn something new, make a friend, and maybe optimize a few processes along the way. It was, Vexthal reflected, the most thoroughly human response imaginable. And perhaps, he thought as he headed to class, the most devastatingly effective form of victory in the galaxy.